So this is the first video in a series of my next phase of my bobber build. I've made several changes over the years, which you guys have probably seen if you've been watching my videos, but now I've been thinking of something a little bit different. In this video, I'm going to go over how I'm going to go ahead and create a tail delete on my own. I'm not going to buy a bolt-on kit. I'm going to make the block-off plate myself. I'm going to actually remount some different tail lights in a different location and the license plate. After this, probably a belt guard, and there's some other changes which you guys will have to keep watching to find out. So let me show you some of the things I'm going to start using to make the block-off plate for the rear fender delete. To do my own tail delete, I've got all these parts here and a few more. And to start off with, I bought assorted wiring, some braided wiring sleeve covering, and some heat shrink tubing to go with that. I've got bolts for some spacers I'm going to make. Nice tapered bolts for the block-off plate, so it's nice and flush. I've got a kit to remount my license plate to the rear axle. As you can see, this is the bracket here to go to the rear axle. And then I do have new tail lights. These are a spun aluminum bell shape with a little beehive lens in here. These are 3-wire lights, so they should be easier than standard 2-wire lights to wire up to an 8 Scout bobber, which has 2 negative wires and a positive. That way you could do turn signals and brakes and the running lights from one light. Some aluminum tubing I'm going to use for spacers in different spots. And this will be the plate. I was originally going to make this the block-off plate. And I thought, you know, it's a little thin, so I decided to get thicker. So I'll use this to make the mounts for the lights. And this is a thicker piece I got to make sure it's strong enough. Probably overly thick, but better to be safe than sorry. So I'll take the rear fender off the bike. I'll use the rear fender support from the bike to get my pattern for the holes and to get the overall shape. So when I'm doing these mods here, I have a rough idea what I'm going to do, and I end up just figuring out some of the issues with it and how to do it as I work. So I don't have a real detailed thing going on here, but anything I do, I'll just figure it out as I go, and it's normally the way I work. Alright, I'm going to start by taking off the tractor seat here. Just the 2 bolts for holding the springs on. There's a bolt back down in there to take off, and there's one up the front. That'll come off there. I'm going to pull off the belt guard, and then I'll go after the lower belt guard. There's one bolt right in here that holds on that belt guard. It is not going to be fun to get to, but I'll manage. Then after that, start taking the Allen bolts on the side off, and the rear lights, and the license plate frame. So let's start taking this thing apart. So there's actually 2 bolts here to hold on the belt cover. So I had to remove the rear tire to get to this one because it was right behind the pulley. And that also leaves me better access to the back fender support. And when I go ahead to make the block-off plate, it'll make it a lot easier. I have a lot more room to work with. So in the long run, it's better to remove the back tire. Alright, the last thing to do here is to remove the rear fender support. Just these 4 bolts. This should be it. Oh, and something else is holding it a little bit. Now it looks like I got one bolt that's holding somewhere in here, so I'm gonna have to dig for it. Because I can see, if I can move this, you can sort of see that little support Looks like it might be plastic or something down there. It's right down in there. You can sort of see how it's hanging on right there. So I'll have to figure out what's holding it on. So be back in a minute. All right, so that bolt right there, and this little piece was the part of the battery box that was holding it on. As you can see right there, that's what broke on me, but there's plenty left here and it'll be behind the plate. So I'm not really worried about it. I guess taking out the battery would make it easy to get an Allen wrench in there, but no big deal. All right, so now I have the whole back of the bike apart. You can see the 4 bolts there. I put them back in for now. Now that area is flat. So bolting a plate to that's not a problem once I get the shape of the plate. My original plan was to use the back of the fender, but as you can see, the back of the fender is not flat. The mounting parts are flat, but there's that little hump in the middle. So I'm not going to be able to trace it out on this because I will not get it lined up correctly. So my plan now is to go ahead and make a piece of wood that will fit there as a template. And then from there, I can make my one out of aluminum. And I should not have any problems at that point. Just make it out of wood first. So here's the wooden template I made. I've already test fit this on the bike. I've transferred it over to a sheet of aluminum. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut it out and drill the holes. Here I have the roughed in block off plate. So the 4 holes to the frame. These 2 bolts are actually going for this extra piece I added in the back to take the place of a spacer that's used for the seat. I'm also going to use these 2 bolts to make a light bracket for the new taillights so they mount under the seat. All right, my boss here says my bracket wasn't good enough. This is the first bracket I made. As you can see, these top holes for the lights would put the lights basically behind the tire when you're looking at it this way. So I traced this on another piece of aluminum, extended the lights out about 1 inch, 1.5 inches, and up 1 inch, and came up with this setup here. Now you can see how far out the lights are. The only thing is the original spacer I used in there is about 1/2 inch. I've got a 3/4 inch and a 1 inch spacers to put in there to move the lights out away from the springs. So I'll go ahead and test fit that, see how it works. And if it works, I'm good to go to clean up the parts. All right, we've checked the clearances. A couple friends came over, helped me check the clearances for the light bracket I just made with the larger spacers. It wasn't working, so we flipped the shocks, reservoir down, rechecked all the clearances to make sure that this reservoir over here would not hit the exhaust. So we checked, it won't hit the exhaust like I thought it might have when I first got this exhaust. And then decided that we'd have to put the taillights outside farther where I thought it might be too tight with the reservoirs. So I made another bracket. That's the first light bracket I made, which put the tail lights behind the rear tire. The second one, which is the one you just saw me have mounted with the tail lights with a little bit smaller spacers, put the back end of the tail lights and the wires right near the spring. And the third one is this one. So with the reservoirs down, the lights won't hit the reservoirs, and the springs are back here, so I don't have any clearance issues at all with this one. Just need to clean it up and clean up the backing plate, and then I can put them all on and start wiring in the lights. There is the license plate bracket I bought. Connects to the axle. The wires run behind this in little channels. And then there is the bracket I made for the taillights. So what I'm going to do, take some of the stock wiring with its connectors as little piggy tails to go to my taillights. This one goes to one of the taillights, and that connects to this connector, which runs to the stock license plate light. I'm going to go ahead and actually use this section. That way I can disconnect here, which might make servicing and running the wires easier in the future. So it's time to start cutting. So now I've done the wiring, and the license plate light is white wire to white wire and black wire to black wire. For these lights that have a red, orange, and black wire, it's red wire from the bike to red wire on the light, white wire from the bike to black wire on the light, and black wire from the bike to orange wire on the light. So now that I have all the wiring figured out, I just have to cut it to length, add some covering to it and some shrink tube, and install the lights. Really? I'm not a chew toy. Alright, rather than measure the wires out, ball break. Rather than measure the wires out, I decided just to run them where I wanted them. So you can see this one I want to have tucked in here. It goes through these holes here to zip tie to keep it away from the springs. Runs down there. I'll shove the extra down there. Here's the license plate one. I'm going to keep this whole thicker covering behind the plate and everything. This is for the light here. That'll tuck in nicely there. And then the license plate one's going to run down to this bolt hole. Zip tie along here. I've got a bolt hole to zip tie there, zip tie here. And then there's a bracket for the back of this, the license plate kit. And you can see here what the license plate will look like. So I'm going to go ahead and get these things all soldered up, put the wire covering on, and then get them installed. This is the way I've been soldering wires for a while now. I think it's called a lineman's knot or some version of it, something similar to that. So you cross the wires in an X, and then you tightly wrap them around the wire so they're nice and tight in opposite directions. So that way when you pull on it, it wants to tighten. Once you throw some solder on this, it's good to go. It's not going to come apart. You're not putting them together like this, which is what I used to do. But once you cross them, wrap them, and then solder them, they're pretty tough.